Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much indeed for choosing to spend an hour of your Friday with us. My name is Ollie Matthews, and I am one of the co-founders here of A Life More Extraordinary with Sarah Burbage and Kat Wildman. For those of you who haven't come across us before, A Life More Extraordinary is hard to define. It's kind of an evolving beast, but at the moment it is a community of like-minded individuals. And as a little bit of background, so Sarah, Kat and myself back in 2020, which seems both only yesterday and a million years ago, all at the same time, we could have decided, you know what, this incredible thing that is happening, good, bad and ugly, it's actually quite an amazing opportunity in a way as well, to start really asking ourselves these kind of questions around what would it be like to live a life more extraordinary. There are lots of sort of quite scary terms being used around lockdown, quarantine, pandemic, death rates, and something maybe even just as scary, this concept of a new normal, which just sounded atrocious at its most best. So we kind of thought, you know what, there has to be something better. And so what we did is we turned to much smarter people than ourselves to try and explore this idea. And over the last few months, I've been holding a series of these events, sort of one a month, to explore with a panel of experts, a panel of talented people, different ideas and themes that have seemed to have cropped up and been important across the last year. Last month, we had a really, really interesting topic and theme around the idea of raging against the machine and that enough is enough. And that across the last year, there has been this, what felt like anyway, sort of an increase in that surge of sort of activism and people saying, I'm really not happy with this. I'm going to do something about it. But that in itself came with its own sort of challenges and risks and blockers. And so it was a really interesting discussion last month, and we wanted to repeat it really this month because it seemed to be something that was really sort of capturing people's imagination and attention. So we brought a new group of panelists together this month, and we will meet them in a little moment. But I wanted to hand over now to our hosts for the show, Kat Wildman and Ina Rator, to introduce themselves, introduce our panel, and open up what should be a really fascinating hour. Thank you very much for joining us. Please ask any questions you want throughout the session in the chat box. There will be sort of Q&A at different points, but do lob any comments in, any ideas, any thoughts, any concerns, any questions, put them in there and we will sort of come to them throughout the show. But Kat, Ina, over to you.
Thanks, Ollie. I'm Kat Wildman. Hi, everybody. This is a topic very close to my heart because I'm co-founder of an organisation called the Global Equality Collective, which is a platform and a framework to help schools and organisations to find and close their gaps in diversity, equality and inclusion. So it's something that I care a lot about, but it's not about me. It's all about you guys and our guests and our panel. So, Eno.
Yes, thanks, Kat. I like to describe myself as a creative, a futurist and a maker at heart. I am usually at my happiest when I'm making things. So anything to do with art and design, lots of useless things, lots of unfinished projects make me happy. So you can imagine after a year of lockdown, my front room currently looks like an episode of Hoarders. But enough about me. Let's find out more about our guests today. I'm going to start with Clover. Clover, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure thing. Absolutely delighted to be joining everyone here today. Thank you so much for welcoming us. So my name is Clover. I am a 21-year-old climate activist and the founder and executive director of Force of Nature. We are a social enterprise that works with students in over 52 countries to really step up rather than shut down in the face of the climate crisis. And we work with decision makers across business and policy and education to ensure that young people have a seat at that decision-making table. And those who have historically been left out of that decision-making process are present and their voices are heard. Thank you for having me.
Amazing. Luba, can you tell us a bit about your story?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here today, and I will spare you my age. Uh, but I shall say this. So I'm a co-founder and director of the audience consultancy ACAS, together with Richard Addy, who is my life partner and my business partner. We set the organization up with a view of having freedom in engaging with organizations that we believe in, and also we're parents of 2 boys, so the freedom to parent on demand, and we work with many purpose-led organizations, and ultimately we help them understand their audiences and serve their audiences better. We feel very passionate about equality, democracy, children, and we've worked on many we've worked on many projects to do with those causes in recent years, and one of which I'll talk about later. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Luba. I liked the idea of, well, you talked about parenting on demand. And at this stage, I'm throwing over to Richard. You talked about parenting on demand, which I'm sure we'll come to later. Richard, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Richard, as Luba said, her other half. I'm also 21, which is a real
You don't look a day over.
Thank you very much. People say that. I suppose my story, of course, Luba and I's story is integrally linked and parallel. But my perspective on it is that I traditionally worked for organisations that are quite traditional, BBC, civil service, some time in banking. And this is a story, I think, of how we tried to change our organisation to be more purpose-led, and how I realised in 2020, last year, that actually one of the purposes that we talked about a lot about with race, I hadn't actually dealt with head on. And as a trustee of Mind, the mental health charity, I'll talk about that later, but many things came to a head where there was an awakening in 2020.
Definitely. I'm going to stick with you, Richard, and I'm going to ask you a bit more about that. So obviously the murder of George Floyd in the summer was a moment where everybody suddenly stood up and started paying attention to the anti-racism conversation. How was that for you? And without wanting to delve into traumatic feelings or thoughts, how was it for you, and how was it for you guys as a couple?
Well, so the backstory for me is, as I said, I was a trustee for Mind for the best part of 8 years. And one of the really sad and shocking things in Britain today is that people of colour are more likely to be affected by mental health challenges. They're less likely to get services, and they're more likely to be sectioned. And in fact, the sectioning is increasing over the years. And in my role as Mind, I, as a board member, I would raise issues around race, but I would always do it quite politely. And I would do it politely because I was kind of covering, and I was covering my blackness. I wanted to be seen as an expert on strategy and audiences and insight, but not to be the person that people turn to whenever an issue of race came along. But the downside of that was that I wasn't speaking up. I wasn't speaking up loudly enough. I wasn't getting angry. And what happened last year, first of all, we saw the disproportionate impact that COVID had on Black and Asian and mixed race communities. My son, who I'm so proud of, Nestor, raised racial issues at school, and that kind of brought it to the surface as well. And then, of course, the murder and death of George Floyd, which really cut deep and was incredibly painful. And incredibly painful listening to his last 8 minutes, and the things he said. And the point is that George Floyd in himself reflects so many experiences of so millions of people. And what it did for me personally is it solidified and forced me to realize that I had to take responsibility. I could no longer cover. I needed to speak up. and speak up because I was in a position of relative privilege and position of relative power. So that was quite painful. And with Luba and I, we had a number of really challenging conversations. As you can imagine, we're together because we have very similar values. We care about the world. We care about doing the right thing. But then we realized, and I realized personally, that I hadn't spoken up enough about my experiences of discrimination, or the fact that for most of my life I had tried to navigate the system, try and work around the system, not attack it. And I realized that actually this was a point where I had to question the system and question people's and systemic racism, etc. And that led to us having some really challenging and painful conversations about understanding, and I felt I couldn't explain well enough what was going on. So yeah, it was a tough time.
Thank you for that, Richard. If you have any comments or questions for the panel, please do feel free to put them in chat. Clover, I'm now going to come to you. So you talked about being 21 and your activism being around climate. I was just wondering, what is your mission, and do you class yourself as an activist?
I definitely rejected that term for a long time, and I'm happy to provide a little bit of context as to why. So I, for background, grew up in Australia's tropical North Queensland, fishing frogs out of the toilet and dodging snakes that hung from the ceiling. So our living room really only had 3 walls, and I spent more time outside than in. So nature was kind of the cornerstone of my upbringing. Now, growing up, I wasn't allowed to watch horror films, so I turned to documentaries instead. I watched The Cove, Food Inc., An Inconvenient Truth. And at the age of 11, I was watching as mass dolphin hunts occurred. I was watching as million-year-old forests were bulldozed to produce Big Macs. I saw the images of frontline communities being swallowed by rising sea levels and flooding. And I was filled with overwhelming despair and anger and frustration. And perhaps most of all, a kind of morbid curiosity as to why the adults in my life were so good at pretending that none of these things were happening, right? We didn't talk about climate change at the dinner table. It certainly didn't learn about it at school. We didn't hear about it from Australian politicians or the media. So I was fascinated by why we feel so paralyzed in response to existential challenges, whether that be the ecological crisis, the climate crisis, or even social injustice and racism, immigration, these issues that are so overwhelming that we feel that we're completely too small to make a difference. And so that was what really sparked my fascination with human psychology and understanding the role of mobilizing mindsets to be able to actually step up rather than shut down and kind of sit on the sidelines of these issues. And I really found my voice as initially a filmmaker and a documentary maker, and trying to persuade hearts and minds in the same way those documentaries had persuaded mine, which was the catalyst for starting Force of Nature. And that was really born out of having worked with both young people in the classroom and also decision makers, working in the boardrooms of big Fortune 500 companies like Unilever and Procter & Gamble, and realizing that both those 8 and 9-year-olds and also people with a lot of power felt incredibly powerless. And I would hear the same stories on repeat with students of being too small to make a difference, of the system being too broken to create meaningful change. And I would hear those same stories working with chief executives who felt so beholden to the status quo, so beholden to the pressures to deliver value to shareholders and climb that corporate ladder and avoid taking the kind of risks that could cost them their jobs. So that was really how we got here today. And in terms of the word activist in particular, I think there is so much kind of baggage around that, and it can feel very exclusionary as well. It's like you're either an activist or you're not. And I think with that comes a rather dangerous rhetoric that like some people do care and some people don't. And I think the reality is that most of us aren't empowered to care about the issue. So in every capacity, we are all activists. We all want to create change in the world, but often we have to identify the barriers within ourselves that are limiting our potential to actually create that world that we all know is possible.
Amazing. I was definitely as wise and articulate as you at your age. So yeah, but I mean that I think it's absolutely incredible, and a lot of the challenges that you speak about, you know, the being beholden to the status quo, that is the same thing across all of diversity, equality, and inclusion topics, as well as climate change. And I think this is just the thing that we're all battling with. So going to Luba now for Luba's side of the Luba and Richard love story in lockdown. I'm loving this. How you were already active in the gender equality space. How was it becoming active in the things that Richard had personal lived experience in also?
Actually, whilst I was working on projects on gender equality before the lockdown, I had the unique opportunity of collaborating with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and ended up authoring 2 reports, The Missing Perspectives of Women in News and COVID-19 News. And during lockdown, I actually those reports gained international recognition to an extent that I hadn't had any of my work recognized before. So that's something that is really unique about that. And actually, for a couple of years before that, I felt lost in my role as a mother, as a wife, as a business partner, to a point where I felt my voice was muted. So writing these reports and whilst understanding the pain that women go through and how little progress was made in the 21st century on equality, gender equality in any area, but specifically news as well, and how the pandemic was pulling everything down, was an incredibly painful process, but one that led to me finding my voice and becoming similar to Richard. I felt uncomfortable being defined as a feminist because in my mind there was this negative perceptions of extreme feminists, and I was slightly shying away from that. But that really went away, and I thought, this, as you say, enough is enough. We've got to do something about it. But to go to your question around engaging on more viscerally with the issue of racism, I was, when I remember us having, Richard and I, conversations around after George Floyd's death, and the anguish that I saw Richard go through was absolutely shocking for me, and primarily it humbled me tremendously, because I realized I don't know the pain that this man I love deeply has been going through all his life, and really brought me, grounded me. And I thought, oh, previously I thought, as a partner of a black man with a mixed race child, I'm really good at this stuff. I understand. And I actually realized, no, and I never will. I will never understand how Richard felt as he was growing up, and I will never understand how Alex feels as he grows up, our mixed race child. So it was incredibly humbling. And also, one of the things Richard said was, it's hard for always to be the one seen to have to talk about this stuff. Always the black man, the only black man or woman in the room, having to raise issues. So I decided to be his champion and champion of people of race, and be also the person who raises things whilst acknowledging and being humble about the limitations that I actually face as a white, privileged, middle-class woman.
Thank you for that, Luba. So you've been talking about experiencing Richard's perception of what it is to be a black man in the UK. And coming back to you, Richard, you say that obviously the death of George Floyd was really painful to see. And you talk about, you know, spending most of your life living as a black man, but making sure you don't rock the boat your chair on, you're one of the chairs on Mind. I just wondered, I mean, George Floyd died during the lockdown, but lots of people still came out, you know, to protest. What has it been like doing the work in lockdown? And also, have you shifted any of the work into social media, where we know is very noisy? What is it like, you know, doing the work both in lockdown and maybe doing some of the work on social media?
I mean, in one word, exhausting. Doing the work during lockdown, both, and I should say more practically, but that the work, by the work I mean two things. One is actually physically producing reports and working with Luba and those reports, and then the other is where the work is where you're doing a bit of reading, doing a lot of talking, and self-examining. And I'd really honestly say that we've worked with a number of, you know, leading organizations, presented to really difficult clients, all of those kind of things that you might think are difficult. I'd easily say that these conversations we've had and the experience of trying to grapple with race and systematic racism and racism on a day-to-day level has been by far the most challenging thing I've personally experienced in recent years. So I think it's been exhausting. It's been really hard. In terms of social media, I'm quite a private person, and there are some platforms I'm not on at all, and there are others that I am on. So I'm not a big Facebook person, but I'm more LinkedIn. And slowly but surely, I'm pushing things out there, treading quite slowly. But the more I push out there, the more confident I am to kind of raise issues around race and raise issues around disparities that we're seeing in society. So it's been exhausting. It's slow. It's hard work. But I do feel, what's the word? I feel less. I was going to say I feel less guilty. I'm making up for lost time. That's the best way I can think about it.
Are you able to separate yourself as a person to your blackness? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, no, actually, it's a really good question. And now, no, is the answer. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think what was happening is that I was compartmentalizing myself. You know, I'll talk about race in a particular dimension, and now it is my blackness, my otherness. It's now me fully. And what's great in our family is that at the dinner table we do talk about all of these things all the time. So interestingly, when I haven't thought about this before, but lockdown has enabled us to just build those conversations, drip them in. And you know, Luba's in particularly good at asking the kids very challenging but interesting questions around all these big issues. So it's now part of, I think it's locked in. Yeah.
Amazing. You guys are such mega couple goals for me. I'm just having a massive crush on both of you. I want to come to the dinner table and answer the questions with you. But just sticking with that then for a second, I want to come back to this concept of parenting on demand. So not only have you been doing the work of both equality and anti-racism and all the different aspects of those and the intersections, but also you've been parenting in lockdown. So this, Sarah always refers to the work-life collide that happened when lockdown started, and this whole concept of new normal was exactly the reason why we wanted to start this group in the first place and start talking about, you know, hang on a minute, we don't want to go back to the old normal because that didn't work for so many different groups of people, one of which was parents. So talk to me a little bit about the parenting on demand and what you've done on that and what you're going to keep and go forward with after lockdown is over.
Is this for me?
Yeah, you can.
Oh.
Yes, Luba.
Sure. So it's incredible. You absolutely nailed it, Kat. It was like being on steroids the whole time. So Our journey was unique. So the first lockdown, I had to write this 270 or 80 pages, we ended up, whilst homeschooling, whilst we were homeschooling, and obviously housekeeping and cooking, and I'm the main cook in the house. So it was so hard. I would say I did 60% of that, and Richard did 40 whilst writing. I at times, and today even we spoke, we looked at each other, was like, how did we do it? And the answer is, we honestly don't know. And I remember going through times when I thought, I can't do it, this is ridiculous. But of course, we did it. The research that Richard was leading and the writing, everything. Then, so the stories, I came out of obscurity and invisibility to becoming an expert that was thought for interviews, conferences. So I found that empowerment, which was pretty cool. Then the second and the third lockdown, I didn't have live clients. So we decided that I was going to go back to being taking actually complete care of the boys, of the homeschooling and everything surrounding it. And Richard was the person with the life contract. So the story arc is so strange, coming from obscurity to expertise, and then stay-at-home expert / mom. So it wasn't easy, but it was. The difficult bit was the low-level anxiety that we always felt. Ironically, we were super cautious, and we all got COVID. So that was also something that we ended up having to deal with, that actually ended up adding to the whole experience of empathy for the people who have had COVID, and still feeling lucky. One other thing to mention, when I was writing and Richard was researching the reports, the thing that made it really hard was reading about the millions of women that had no voice, that were losing their jobs. In some countries, they didn't even have access to testing, which had incredible implications on policy making. And that kind of there were a couple of stats that really knocked us down significantly. One was realizing that 90% of the population in the world has at least one anti-women bias. And the second one is that at least around 30% of the population in the world believe, men and women, believe that it's okay for a man to beat his wife. And when we read this, the level of bias that still exists today, I mean, that really knocked us. It was almost very depressing, but empowering nonetheless to really go for it and try and amplify the messages. And we were so grateful for this being able to happen. And the boys don't hate us yet, so hopefully we haven't done too much damage.
And it's incredible. I'm feeling anxious just listening to like the amount of work and high profile stuff that was going on for you guys whilst also homeschooling, which is no mean feat, as everybody who has homeschooled kids is aware. What things are you going to keep? So what things, I know that you said the dinner table conversations and keeping your protected characteristics and who you are as one thing and not compartmentalizing anymore, but what other things in terms of work-life balance are you in particular, Luba, going to keep going forward with family and work, etc.?
Actually, I think the thing that I'm going to keep forward is having fun with my family when the heart gets going. Oh, I forgot the phrase in English.
When the going gets tough.
Yes, thank you so much. The going gets tough, because basically you can get too deep into purpose. And I think Clover said that in our pre-meet this week, where you can really face burnout, and that's really dangerous place to be. So my thing that I'm going to keep is watching this lovely series with my children and with Richard, like Superstore, Modern Family, that you can have a laugh and just unwind and remember that we actually need to have some fun as well, and try not to feel guilty, because I've taken a lot of guilt as knowing that I'm privileged in terms of, I mean, I found that I have 28 privileges after reading the book, So You Want to Talk About Race. I did the exercise that Luba asks and found that I have 28 privileges. So when I have a good time, I sometimes feel guilty. I feel that I shouldn't because so many people are suffering, like millions. But I try to counteract this because if you end up too deep into it, then you get depressed, and then who will benefit from that? So this is my biggest keeper, trying to balance purpose with pleasure.
A couple of comments on chat. Claire says, I love that too, Luba. I spoke to a colleague yesterday who said exactly the same thing to me, referring to his wife who suffers from MS. Dave says to the panel, thank you so much for sharing all your experiences and insights. So Clover, Luba says that you have, burnout under control, I think she said. I know that you had a few aha moments on the lockdown. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Richard, which is, what has it been like doing the work that you do, climate activism, on the lockdown? And also, I presume that as a young person, you're 21, you already do a lot of the work on social media, which I would imagine is very noisy. So 2 questions. What is it like doing climate activism on the lockdown? And also, what is it like doing that work on social media?
Thank you for the question. So building off Luba's comment, I think for anyone who makes their life's work solving a societal problem, you obviously conflate your identity with solving that challenge. And I reflected on this a lot over the past year because in many ways, I don't remember who I was before climate change or before kind of putting in the work, because I don't know who I was before the age of 11. And you want to invest yourself fully. And yet at the same time, it's so important that you create those boundaries and show up to do the work without wrapping up your own sense of self and worth and value in the outcome of those actions. And this became really poignant for me in 2019 with the fires back home in Australia. I grew up reading about climate change. I grew up in a bubble of climate privilege where it was something abstract and I could see the enormity of it, but didn't affect my culture. It didn't affect my upbringing to the extent of, young people losing their homes in the Maldives or to flooding in Jakarta. And in 2019, in November, I found myself spontaneously crying. So I would burst into tears in the shower. I would start sobbing on the tube. I'd break down in meetings. And it was because I was seeing images of what was happening back home. 2 billion animals incinerated in the flames, and friends poised on tin roofs, holding hoses, trying to beat back the flames. Places that I'd grown up in that had defined me as an environmentalist, suddenly just embers and ashes. And it was a real loss of culture. It felt like the loss of my childhood, and it felt like the loss of myself too, because so much of my self-worth was wrapped up in solving this thing, the climate crisis, which is so enormous and so overwhelming to begin with. But when you see inaction in the face of it, when you see widespread apathy, it feels like a personal failure. So it wasn't burnout for me so much as like emotional breakdown. And yet I realized that that was also because I hadn't allowed myself to fully sit in those feelings. In many ways, I felt like a bit of a caricature because here I was, going and speaking on world stages and being on panel events as the kind of inspiring, optimistic version of Greta Thunberg saying, yes, we can solve all of the issues and we're going to fix the problem. And yet I realized I was going through grief and a lot of pain, and I couldn't keep lying to myself that everything was going to be okay. And I had to accept the very, very difficult truth that there was every chance that not enough people would act, and that we would continue to lose species every single day. We would continue to lose the parts of the world that are so precious to me, like Borneo. So there was a kind of separation that needed to happen, but also a reconciliation of those feelings. And I think my experience is not a unique one. A lot of our research at Force of Nature is around the rise of eco-anxiety. And eco-anxiety relates to those feelings of fear and stress and grief in response to the climate crisis. In 2019, research in the UK showed that over 70% of 18 to 24-year-olds experienced eco-anxiety. And we conducted the same research on an international scale. So we spoke to students, over 500 students in 52 countries, and over 70% of them said, I feel hopeless in response to the climate crisis. I feel despairing of the future, which is so opposite to the kind of mainstream rhetoric that young people are empowered and creating change. You know, you talk to a lot of young people today, and when you ask them about the future, it isn't, you know, some utopian dream of flying cars and deadly diseases being eradicated. I have young people day in, day out telling me that they're going to inherit cities underwater and empty supermarket shelves, a planet dying, the kind of place no one wants to find waiting for them when they grow up. So eco-anxiety is not something we would want to pathologize because it's a human response. It shows a depth of empathy. It shows that you're not kind of numbing yourself to the situation or in some state of denial as we hurtle toward the cliff, but you have to create a sense of agency within that and let go of those expectations of the outcome so that you don't completely lose your marbles in the process. And as a final point on social media, I have a very mixed relationship with social media. I think I got Facebook when I was about 9 years old. So it's really been part of my upbringing. I experienced cyberbullying on Facebook when I was about 11, which drove me to the point of being suicidal. So I've seen the really dark side of social media. And even today, you know, having a presence on these platforms, I'm regularly described as a communist, and I've received death threats and rape threats and everything else, which is really difficult, right? It adds to that emotional burden and that emotional load. And at the same time, I've seen how social media is the most incredible connector. It's been a great catalyst for social movements over the past year in particular. And it's disseminating knowledge that would otherwise not be accessible. So I talked to 13-year-olds who are describing the climate crisis as a systemic problem and talking about how its roots lie in colonialism and the commodification of nature and exploitation of frontline communities. So the depth of awareness is just incredible. And I really feel that's because we have distributed communication. We have young people learning from their peers. So it feels like a bit of a double-edged sword.
Absolutely amazing. I just there's so much in what you just said. I wish that we could just take over everyone's screens right now and just broadcast this whole thing to everybody, because I wish everyone could hear it. It's amazing. On that point of, you know, the feeling of the anxiety just being about widespread apathy and just people like jumping up and down on all of these issues and going, listen to me, stand with me, do something, anything. What can, if you were to give, you know, a takeaway to everyone here today that we could then spread to 10 more people over the weekend, what would that one thing be that we can all do to feel like, you know, we've made a start?
So I think there's a lot of pressure on social media to be active on all of the issues. And particularly in like Gen Z, the woke generation, you have to be vocal about everything. And I think we naturally care. We all care about these issues. We care about climate change and prison reform and social justice and gender rights. And yet we lose some of our impact if we try to dissipate our energy across all of those issues. And I think any change maker in history would argue that to have impact, you must have focus. So look at the challenges for their intersectionality. You know, don't be blind to the interconnections and the relationships between gender equity and climate change, right? But if you want to have impact, say, this is the problem that I want to take ownership of. And I think the beauty of the situation that we're in right now is that there are a million ways in which you can make a difference, right? And that are directly related to your passion. So if, fashion is your passion, then how do we, change our relationship to clothes to be fully circular? If you're really motivated by food, then how do we change the fact that we waste a third of it every single day? Or if you're motivated by gender equity, do you know that providing education to girls and women's reproductive rights is one of the most effective climate solutions that we have? So I really, as corny as this is going to sound, I see the world as, a 7.8 billion piece puzzle in which everyone has a place. We each need to kind of take ownership of that piece and say, yeah, that's the problem that I want to see changed in my lifetime.
Thank you so much for that, Clover. Richard, it's coming up to a year since George Floyd was killed. So, there was a lot of activism initially after his death. And then we had the Breonna Taylor protest as well. That was in the US. In the UK, I would say we had a different flavor, talking about how racism affects Black people in the UK. Sticking with the same question that we just asked Clover, what can people do to, I guess, carry on with the awareness that racism does happen in the UK?
Yeah. I think, first of all, we all need to decide, just make that decision that we are going to, there's a phrase that John Lewis, the civil rights campaigner who died last year in the States, uses, is create good trouble, that we are all going to get in there and create good trouble. That's the first thing. The second thing would be, you've got to do the work. And so avoid, both for gender and race and other issues, avoid going to a woman or a person who's Black or Asian and asking them to tell you what to do. Before you do that, have you read anything? Have you explored anything? Because then that's a burden on those individuals to change the world. So you make an attempt. And then just to build on what Clover said, we've got so many opportunities, right from speaking to your partner or your kids at the dinner table. That's a start. That is something, because as we just said, each individual can make a little difference. To, posting or commenting about things. You can donate to a charity, you can volunteer, you can fundraise for a charity, write to your representative. Just little things will make a big difference. But I think from now on, there is no excuse to do nothing. So my headline would be, decide not to do nothing.
I love that. Yeah, I think we should all decide not to do nothing. I feel some pledges coming on social media. I love it. This feels really accessible to people. I think that both of the things that Clover and Richard have said is just make a decision within yourself to just be a slightly different person. Pick a side and then fight for it. I love it. Luba, what would you say? Like you are fighting for gender equality, and having seen the way that COVID has disproportionately affected women at all the different intersections, what would you say that people can do, can take away from this and help with that battle?
So there are a few things, but I'll say the one that I think will have disproportionate positive impact. So what's happening with the gender conversation is we've realized that in the 21st century, so little has changed, despite our unconscious biases thinking that actually, didn't we deal with gender? We've dealt with that. We're moving forward. So realizing that there isn't not enough change has been made is really important, because you can only fix something if you know that it's broken. But the second thing, which I think that's where the disproportionately positive change is, to make sure we bring men and women on the same side of the problem. I cannot tell you how often I end up in meetings or in sessions, conferences about gender issues in media, and I look around and it's 100% women. And I know from all the work that I've done that actually vast majority of decision makers in this area are men. So where are the the people in power who can actually make a difference. We need to find narratives that bring men and women together, and if we are journalists or anyone, we need to care, to find a way to convince people to care, and to realize that actually when it comes to norms, patriarchal norms, men also suffer from them, and women are also a solution. So we're all solution to this problem. So this, I feel very strongly, I want to see more engagement from the two conventional genders and everyone in between, of course, on all these issues. I hope that's helpful. I mean, I can go on with others, but
no, that's brilliant advice, Luba.
Can I just mention the chat, because absolutely, with all that amazing advice coming in, I just wanted to bring in some people here. Claire Goodman, you said that you love what Clover shared about it being really important to jump to action and find your space.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just thank you so much to my video's gone. Sorry, my video's gone, but I'm here. Yeah, no, just thank you so much, all the panelists. It's been just a fascinating conversation. So I'm an executive coach, but sort of pivoting my role, really looking at climate coaching and the role that coaching can play, because I think, as you know, to Clover's point, yes, before we kind of jump to kind of being active and finding what we can do, it can be so easy to feel that overwhelm and, you know, what on earth can I do? And actually having that safe space, that non-judgmental space where, you know, we can actually explore those feelings of anxiety, of overwhelm, of scarcity, is so important. And I think there's excitingly, there's a group of professional coaches who are kind of just see this as an amazing opportunity, because actually coaching can be a really powerful tool to create that space to help people process those feelings and then figure out, get clear on, okay, so now I'm in a kind of better place. I've got the right mindset. What is it that I can do? So that's what I've been involved with, and I'm just really excited to hear what kind of Clover's doing, I suppose, with the young people, but really feel that, you know, for the rest of us who are a bit older, where we are in positions of perhaps influence or power, where we touch power, you know, we really need to kind of crack on with thinking about what is the role that we can each play. So it's a really interesting conversation.
Great, thank you, Claire. So actually, Claire, it's great to have you as part of the Life More Extraordinary family. And obviously with climate change anxiety being a real issue, I should let you know that we also have a boot camp happening, an extraordinary boot camp tomorrow, a boot camp more extraordinary. And Claire is offering climate change coaching as part of that day, which is a mix of exercise classes, mindfulness. And as we've only got sort of 5 minutes to go, and obviously there is so much for each of our incredible guests to share, I also wanted to just let you know, we do record podcasts with our panelists as well, so we can go a lot more in depth. So do kind of like follow us on Instagram and on our social media to like hear more of some of the incredible things that they are sharing about kind of, you know, being purposeful and channeling that anxiety to have focus and impact. But yeah, if you fancy a bit of a Zoom boot camp, do have a look at that tomorrow, and do sort of join us for a HIIT class or for some mindfulness or some sort of reflection on how you might build your life more extraordinary, and then it's there. And you can get more information and times on that on our website, which Ollie has just posted in the chat. There's a section called Bootcamp, there's a section called Podcasts, and then there's also more information on our next episodes. It's obviously so great to dig into some of these amazing issues that are coming up and being raised through lockdown. So yeah, thank you to everybody for being with us today. Let's see if we've just got some more time for any of our questions. Eco-anxiety is so real, lots of people commenting. Luba, yes?
Louise Roby has made a very good point, which I now lost, but it was around the importance of how we parent boys. And actually, I feel incredibly passionate about, as a mother of 2 boys, bringing them on and talking openly but non-judgmentally about the existing stereotypes is so incredibly important. And as hard as it is to say it for a mother whose the safety of my children is incredibly important, but we are teaching them not to be bystanders, neither with issues about race or gender. Just don't be a bystander. Choose to help, choose to act.
You know what, it's funny, as a father to a young daughter, and with some of the very sad events that have happened, even just in the last couple of weeks, it's a really challenging time as well to start thinking about when do you start introducing these kind of topics and how do you start introducing them. And I think that's a really interesting point there, where actually the underlying maybe sort of starting point is about just having a discussion and actually creating an environment where questions, curiosity are encouraged and opinion is sought and emotions are okay. And you can then layer and build upon that, but without that solid foundation. And I know it's something that you know, again, like I say, with my little girl, you kind of be like, are you, and she's 7, so it's like, are you old enough for this kind of topic? I don't know. And I don't really have the answer, but you do think, actually, if I just start with making sure you always feel comfortable to ask a question, you always feel comfortable to say, Daddy, I'm scared, or Daddy, I don't know, or Daddy, can you, anything like that, that's got to be a good starting point.
Definitely. I think one other on that topic that you just raised is a consent, opening the conversation about consent with kids as early as you possibly can, even just commentating about when you're going to touch them. You know, there's a lot of stuff in the media about asking babies permission to change their nappy, but when would you not commentate on that? You would always say, we're going to change your nappy now. And then as they get older, just teaching, especially boys, about consent and that you have to ask for it. And if someone's not okay with it, read the body language as well as to listen to what they're saying. But that conversation can start early doors, because toddlers love touching, and you can always push back on that as a parent and demonstrate that as well.
Yeah, and it's such a it's you know, really good that it's been raised actually as a key issue. And obviously we've been kind of sensing the different themes that are coming forward from everyone through kind of lockdown, and the things we're sort of saying enough is enough, or we need to kind of have an open conversation about these things. And actually I do feel a bit like I'm doing the ad breaks here, but our next session is going to look around. The kids are all right, aren't they? And it's actually looking at what have our young people been living through in this year, and kind of, you know, really great to hear Clover raising the issue of young people and climate change anxiety, but also kind of the issues of like, how do we have those discussions with our young people? So do look out for that, as that will be our conversation next month. And I just wanted to thank everybody, including everyone on chat and everybody that's been a part of the conversation today, and all of our incredible panelists and our hosts, Eno and Kat. Session of life extraordinary and join the community.
You gone all
social
robotic
media.
again.
Great to have you with us. Happy Friday. See you at boot camp.
Bye everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Luba. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Clover. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.
Bye, everybody. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.